Welcome to the Creative Plane Podcast Network. Join us as we review our favorite RPGs, collectible card games, MMOs, video games, PC games, and bring up interesting topics and things that we'd like to share with everyone. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion to Ragnarok story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and RPGpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
All right, David, take it away.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is our panel on multicultural steampunk literature, and my name is David Lee Summers, and I am the author of this fine series of steampunk novels. Let's start with Owl Dance, run through Lightning Wolves, and The Brazen Shark is the new one just out as of a month ago, and thank you. And it is the Clockwork Legion series. I am working on book 4 right now, and I have, there are rumors it might continue even beyond book 4.
So, that's very exciting news.
It is. So by day, I am a mild-mannered author of steampunk literature. By night, I work up at Kit Peak National Observatory operating telescopes and do some of that as well. And I have had a long interest in multicultural steampunk, partly because of just growing up in the Southwest, having parents who grew up in the Southwest, having grandparents who homesteaded in Texas and New Mexico. The Southwest is a very multicultural environment, and to me, it's hard to imagine writing steampunk that doesn't take into account other cultures.
I have read David's books, and I run first of all, I'm Madam Askew. You don't know who I am. I'm like, I see only people who I've met, so I'm like, oh, no. But I'm Madam Askew, and I'm part of the board that runs the Tucson Steampunk Society, and we have a monthly book club. I have a very avid love of steampunk fiction, which I love to present. I have a background in linguistic anthropology, and I speak a host of languages because that's really fun. And that's my outside of character life. And so, like David, I really cannot imagine reading about the steampunk world, much less writing about it, and limiting it to one tiny little island with one tiny but teeming city, because really, I like to remind people, funny thing about the 19th century happened all over the planet at the same time. So I've read David's books, and David, you know I love your books.
Thank you.
I will tell all of you I love his books, and that you have a really wonderful take on incorporating more culture, Southwest culture, in a way that never feels like you've never just jammed it in, like painting gears on it. It's like very organically and importantly a part of the story, which I think is lovely. So I highly recommend his books, FYI.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And now we pay you. Well, we'll do that after.
Right, you're actually books as David comes again to my book club and we discuss The Brazen Shark.
Yes.
That's what
That's a given.
So anyway, we're here to talk about not my books, but But other books that we would recommend that also do a good job and discuss the 19th century in steampunk literature. We're here to answer your questions about the subject and maybe even talk about what we like about these books. And I guess we can, I did make a brief list.
Oh, good on you.
I can start out with that, or if you want to suggest anything.
Well, I mean, maybe we can sort of give a personal favorite to start.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yes. So, one of my personal favorites that is sort of a really interesting multicultural approach to steampunk is S.M. Sterling's Peshawar Lancers.
You stole mine. You have apprehended my book.
That's not your favorite. Well, that's how good it is.
Well, I will think of a second one while you're while you discuss the value.
Let me just say that there are some really fun things about this book. It is sort of retro-futuristic, so it takes steampunk and that genre. And do you know, the beautiful thing about our genre is we can look backwards and reimagine the 19th century, or we can imagine some cataclysm that sort of froze our development and continues the mores and the culture of the 19th century with technology proceeding. Oh, hello! Excellent!
Nice collar and a crown.
No, thank you.
Voluntary association.
Yes! Tea for the people. My
For the
heavens.
people.
For the people.
For the people. And what he does in this book is he has the cataclysm. And so all of the people in the British Empire have to end up in the Raj. They end up in India. And the cultures mingle, develop, change, and grow into a whole new amalgamation. It's beautiful.
In fact, the novel is set during the 20th century, but it's the 20th century in a world where the Americas have essentially stagnated and disappeared off the map, and all of the British Empire is centered in India, and the greater game between between the British Empire and Russia has continued even further. So the Cold War that we might have between the US and Russia has now become between the Raj and Russia.
He does some lovely things with language, culture, and with dress. One of the things I love about this book is it never feels like he's just stealing something and appropriating it. To give a little bit of, oh look, it's a quirky character, the sidekick who's, got a charming accent. No, but these are fully fledged characters, respectfully represented. And Mr. Sterling, I'm sure you know him as well, is perhaps one of the most erudite people I've ever met. You can ask him any question and he will give you extraordinary and engaging information.
The man does research like no one I know, and I know he does his homework. He just does a beautiful job looking in anything he does. He is going to go do his homework on, and he has done alternate history for years.
Yeah, so it's beautifully done. So that's my favorite, and I love to recommend that one to people to read. Yeah.
Are there gadgets and technology?
There are gadgets. There are airships. There is technology. There are cars, right, or some sort of motor vehicle.
Right, because we are up into the 20th century, so they have developed internal combustion.
Right, they're using the Stirling engine and that sort of thing. There's a great moment on an airship, like a battle royale of an airship that does not feel contrived at all, like it's a nail biter. So good. So there's great use of sci-fi technology. Again, one of my, as a reader and a lover of our genre, one of the things I hate most is a book that feels like it's just another genre and someone has done a sepia paint over it and metaphorically glued a few years on it, and you're like, but that technology makes no sense. Why is that there? I mean, like, there's an airship and they live underwater. I'm so confused. So, you know, one of the things I like about this is all of the technology moves the plot and makes sense in the story. So it's really good sci-fi, I guess is what I'm saying.
He does get into telepathy in it, but he does it, his angle on it is, if you have studied the Cold War, you know the Russians were looking into telepathy for real in our world, and he develops it in such a way that it's not overpowering. People can just read anything out of their mind. It's almost more of an empathic power, and it feels very organic within the novel. It doesn't feel like it's a forced-on sci-fi trope to have a sci-fi trope in the novel.
It's really lovely. So did you think of another one that you loved?
I did think of another one, and I'm actually going to, in this case, recommend a small press novel. It is only available on Kindle, unfortunately, for those who like paper, but it's Beyond the Rails by a fellow named Jack Tyler, and what it is basically African steampunk.
Oh, fantastic.
And he admits pretty freely that he took the idea of Firefly and took that the character, that he has an airship crew that will basically take any job, do anything, whether legal or not, and they are working in Africa. And again, he has just done this research into what Africa was like in the 19th century. He has a crew that's very believable. He has a crew that has come to the point of realizing that if you go down into the wild parts of Africa, as they would have been known to the British and to the Americans, and mess with people, they will destroy you, basically. And he paints this very realistically. He has people who, the villains are often the exploiters of the African cultures, but he's very respectful of the African cultures that were there. The airship crew is really a great bunch of people. You really begin to fall for them. There are 2 books, Beyond the Rails and Beyond the Rails 2, and they are definitely worth looking up, and I highly recommend them.
And often I have found personally that the small press is a really great resource for finding some fantastic steampunk that deals with something other than Albion. And you know, even getting really good steampunk that deals with the Southwest, such as you do, David, is rare. So much is set in this sort of like hyper-Victorian London setting. And let me tell you, I've been to London. I like it. It's a nice city. And I like England. Very pretty. Kind of prefer Glasgow. Not gonna lie. But that's in Scotland, and I'm assuming you all know your geography, so stop me if you don't. Be strange. But, because you're all very smart people. But, you too, Verity. I know that you're like on point. But anyway, so it's hard to just get out of England sometimes, even to the Southwest and gunslingers. So getting to the small presses can be very useful. And
And I was just going to say, one of the places you can go to, one of the literary ghettos you can go to find good Southwestern steampunk, is sometimes it's billed under the title Weird Western. And it's worth looking up Weird Western novels, because some of them, not all of them are steampunk. Some of them are very much magical stories. Some of them are very much aliens or what have you. But there are some very good steampunk books hiding under this Weird Western title.
Right, Emma Ball did one that's kind of like Territory set in Tombstone.
Basically, Wyatt Earp and Johnny Ringo are wizards, in this and fighting against each other.
And it's a lovely, I mean, Emma Bull is a fantastic writer anyway, but it's a really lovely read. And then, I mean, you just did a Kickstarter of some interesting short fiction.
We did.
And then, Go, what is the first name?
Okay, so the Kickstarter was for and in fact that's a segue to another one to talk about too. The Kickstarter was for a book called Gaslight and Grimm, which is a steampunk fairy tales anthology. Now, much of the steampunk in there is going to be very traditional steampunk, but the editor, Danielle Ackley McPhail, is very interested in multicultural steampunk. My story in this particular anthology is a story set in India. I actually went directly to the source material with the Grimm, with the Grimm brothers, and found one of their little-known stories called. No, go ahead and sit down.
Yeah, I have half a knee missing, so sometimes.
I feel,
This is a terrible chair.
Oh, here, how about?
How about that one with the rounded back? That would probably be better.
He wants to go dancing. So, thank you very much.
Here, that's better.
Thank you. I like to stand, but sometimes my knee says no.
But yes, Gaslight. But my story in it is set in India. It takes some inspiration from Kipling, from The Man Who Would Be King, and puts this into the story is the original story is the dragon and his grandmother, and my process in this was. Back in my long ago misspent youth, I actually got a German translator certificate. Like you, I love languages, and one of the projects we did on the way to that was translating Schneewittchen, the original Snow White. And so I've always had a love of the original Grimm fairy tales, and so I actually did my own translation of The Dragon and His Grandmother, which is just a great title.
Yes, it is.
It wonders, how does a dragon have a grandmother? And especially when you meet her, she's very human. So.
Now I can't wait to read it, and I know I backed that Kickstarter, so.
Okay, thank you. And one of the other, but my segue in there was that Danielle, actually, this is another book, and I can recommend it because I have, for my magazine, Tales of the Talisman, and for some anthologies I've edited Danielle. I have the book, but I haven't read it yet, but she collaborated. This was a story she wrote for Gaslight and Grimm called, let me make sure I get it right, Baba Ali and the Clockwork Jinn, which is her take on Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and she collaborated with Day Al-Muhammad, and it started out, it was going to be a short story, and as many short stories are once you start looking at the Grimm fairy tales, or once you start looking at even the Arabian Nights, you realize these stories were very spare when they're told, and if you start expanding them to try to really understand the characters, sometimes they have a way of growing and growing, and so it ended up becoming a novel in its own right. So I recommend, I know Danielle well enough to feel safe, even though I have yet to read it yet. I would strongly recommend Baba Ali and the Clockwork Jinn.
And we may have to put that on the book club reading list.
And I believe that one is available in paperback.
Fantastic.
So. And if you were in the if you supported the Kickstarter, I think she actually has it in the package of ebooks that she gave away too. So.
Oh, good.
So you may actually already have it available.
Another Kickstarter and another really important figure in this whole discussion of multicultural steampunk literature is Jamie Go. She's an editor, and she did a Kickstarter with several other Southeast Asian, Polynesian, Chinese, Malaysian individuals, and so all of their steampunk stories from that Kickstarter are set in that part of our globe, and it's all short fiction, but it's very good. And of course, I am drawing a blank on the name just at this moment, but if you look up Jamie Go, you will quickly find links to her work, to her editing, and to her fiction.
Is she the person behind BeyondVictoriana.com?
No, that is...
that's another great resource.
That is another great resource. That is not Jamie.
Okay.
My goodness, and she is lovely, the woman behind Beyond Victoriana.
I can probably find that very quickly.
Yeah, maybe it is Jamie. Oh goodness, I'm so
Isn't
good.
it Sunadasi in Edinburgh?
No, the woman who does multiculturalism beyond Victoriana actually lives in New York, I think.
That's.
Is that Jamie?
In fact, I have her
It
website.
is Jamie. All right.
You're right. It is. I was thinking.
You're right,
maybe
David.
Victoria.
Yeah.
Or Steampunk India.
That's right, you're right. Steampunk India is also another brilliant resource. She has a Facebook page too. She posts a lot of information. But you were right, David, it's Jamie.
Yes, in fact, I'm looking at her site right now. No, it is. No, sorry, it's.
G-O-H for go.
No, it's actually. It's Diana Foe who is
Diana
beyond.
Foe does
Yes.
Beyond Victoriana. She is a delight. And Jamie Go is G-O-H Go, and she is also lovely. And so you can get some really great short fiction through them, and also the Beyond Victoriana is just a brilliant website with lots of information.
She recommends steampunk books that are multicultural steampunk books. She talks about multicultural steampunk costuming and doing it in an appropriate way that you're not appropriating the culture,
Right.
which is an important.
She works for Tor, you're right. She usually has a regular feature through Tor on their website that she reviews and talks about events in the steampunk community and different books. So not only does she have this website, but she is helping Tor have a broader catalog for steampunk, which is really great for us. Oh well, she is a delightful human. I really like her. So, and then there is another gentleman out of like the Atlanta area. You're going to remember his name. Yeah, Steampunk is sort of his take on steampunk. And he wrote the Chronicles of Harriet Tubman, didn't he? Or
Balagoon Ojikade.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
And Milton Davis is the other collaborator on the Steampunk anthology.
You're right. So that is wonderful because it's coming from like an African American perspective. It's writing about some of the folk heroes in that community from the 19th century, and also just looking through that lens in the Americas, which is really fantastic. So.
And speaking, while we're kind of on the subject of anthologies and going back a little bit to the Weird Western, one anthology series I recommend is Cynthia. Let me make sure. Cynthia Ward. It's a good thing. Notes are a good thing.
Yeah, notes are good.
Cynthia Ward has the anthologies, the Lost Trails anthologies, and featuring a number of authors of various ethnicities. But the whole idea behind them is that they are multicultural Weird Western stories. And the first volume is out, and I have that one, and it has people like Nicole Kurtz, who is a wonderful African-American steampunk author. She has not done any novels that I know of yet in steampunk. She's done some very good, she does a very good science fiction mystery series that I highly recommend. And unfortunately, I didn't write down the name of the detective, but Sybil Lewis is the name. The Sybil Lewis series is worth it from a science fiction point of view. But Nicole Kurtz is in these anthologies. Ernie Hogan, who is a Phoenix area Latino author. Rudy Chavez Garcia from Denver is in the anthologies. And Cynthia is very, if you friend her on Facebook, look up her material, she's she's also very interested in seeing multicultural representations of steampunk, seeing steampunk written from women's perspectives and the problems of the women of the day, of underrepresented peoples, seeing that all taken care of.
And on that note, I have to recommend Karen Memory by Elizabeth Bear. It came out just last year in hardback, and it's coming out just now in paperback. And it's set in San Francisco. It is not a young adult novel. It does deal with some adult situations. It's not salacious, but it's set in a gritty world, the gritty world of San Francisco, as in a steampunk setting, but San Francisco during the gold rush. And these women are just going through many hardships and dealing with the miners, with a variety of discrimination, cultural discrimination, gender discrimination, and even like job discrimination. And so the ways in which they navigate that it's very interesting. It never feels heavy-handed or like it's a polemic. It feels very much, it's character-driven, and the plot is very well developed. In fact, I literally read it like cover to cover when I should have been doing many other things. It was a very good read. In fact, I read it and I insisted on doing it for book club to read it again because it's so good. So, yeah.
Well, let's see. We can kind of talk about some of the other items on my list. We've actually covered several of them.
Oh, good.
So far.
We do have a quick question here, though.
Sure.
Let's go back to the end.
No, please do.
You said your inspiration comes from your family history.
Mm-hmm.
But where do you get your research? Do you Google it? Do you actually go to the library?
That's a good question.
Do you like to collect books?
Well, yes, yes to all of that, actually. All of the above.
History, so a lot of it's...
Well, my background's actually astronomy, but as far as doing, it taught me how to do research, basically.
No alien influence?
Oh, some in there.
Oh,
we
yeah,
can't talk about that. You can't leave the room now.
That would be spoilers.
Close the door just in time.
Yes. But
David, you did work in that amazing historical, like, Victorian observatory.
Oh yes. Well, I can. Just to kind of go through some of the different sources of it. I did work in the observatory. I worked at Maria Mitchell Observatory on Nantucket, which was one of the places that I really got a good. That's where I really kind of got my initial love of steampunk, and it was the Maria Mitchell Observatory was an observatory named for America's first woman astronomer, Maria Mitchell. She was also the first, even though it was an all-women's college, she was the first woman to be a professor at Vassar. She discovered even though she was a senior professor, she discovered that she was not the highest paid professor at Vassar, or was not equal to professors of similar rank, and she argued successfully for being paid equal pay for that. But and she discovered a comet, and she started. She was very key on starting the photographic plate collections that are at Harvard College Observatory now, and my connection to it was I was there as a student for the summer at the observatory named in her honor, and I learned in the 1980s how I could still, how remarkable it was that I could do science that was still relevant using technology from the 19th century, and it gave me a real appreciation for the technology of that period, and I just absolutely loved that element of it. Just to continue on the question, The Brazen Shark, which is my most recent novel, I was looking for, I knew I wanted to set a good portion of the novel in Japan. And unfortunately, that's one place I've not been able to travel to yet, but have wanted to. But my brother has traveled there and had many, many wonderful stories of his time in Japan. And I went to him and I said, who would you recommend would talk about Meiji-era Japan? And he pointed me to one of the people who is now one of my go-to people in research of the period, a fellow named Lafcadio Hearn. Lafcadio Hearn...
Oh, his books are so great.
If you want to read period... If you want to read period...
It's apparently they're really good books.
She's flush.
They're some of my favorite books.
I had to
So
go on
fun.
let me tell you, my fandom of Lafcadio Hearn was such that I had to go visit his house when I was in New Orleans.
Oh.
It was a pilgrimage that had to happen this last summer. And I went and did my obeisance and touched the house to hopefully... But the story of who Lafcadio Hearn is, for those who don't know him, he was an Irish immigrant to the United States, I want to say circa 1865. And he lived in Cincinnati, went to work for the newspapers. After the Civil War, he went down to New Orleans, and he became a newspaper reporter there. And he is the person... We now pretty much know New Orleans is a very unique city in the South, but if you look back at the time, people didn't really see New Orleans as anything particularly different than just another southern city. And he is the person who really we have learned that New Orleans had this really remarkable, rich French Creole culture. He wrote the first books of voodoo culture. He actually wrote the first Cajun and Creole cookbooks. Nowadays, you turn on PBS and you find, we find Creole and Cajun cooking all over the place. It's Lafcadio Hearn who this goes back to. He wrote the obituary for Marie Laveau. Okay, that would have been enough to have cemented his place in 19th century literature. And he wrote about these things eloquently. They're not just dry newspaper accounts, but he wrote about them respectfully and wonderfully. He then immigrated to Japan in the 1890s, and he took a Japanese name. He married, and all of his descendants are in Japan to this day. And he is the person for whom we know we in the West really know Meiji-era Japan from his writings. He sent his writings back to America, and some of them are day-to-day life writings, slice of life kinds of writings, and that's the kind of stuff I used. But he also collected things like folk tales. He has 2 or 3 wonderful Japanese folktale collections. One of them is Kwaidan, which was made into a movie in the 60s, starring Toshiro Mifune. And if you care to carry on with anything else.
He's delightful. So I'm sort of like in a state of bliss about him. I don't even remember where we were at before we went on.
Well,
that
it was
tangent.
research. It was
Oh,
research. So yes. So some of it is one of the things I like to do is I like to read accounts from people living at that time, from other writers who were actually living at that time, writing about the period, because I think one of the things that while you can read a modern, well-researched history, one of the things that you can run into as a problem, and one of my research books for Owl Dance was Pat Garrett's The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. Now, if you go through and look at good history written about Billy the Kid, you'll find out that the authentic life of Billy the Kid is probably not so authentic. He's got a lot of personal bias in the way he tells the story. He clearly was, it probably even was ghost written, but it gives you what people at the time knew about Billy the Kid. You see how it fell into the popular culture. You see how he spoke about it. You kind of see his take on it. And then you kind of look at the nonfiction. You look at the well-researched info to kind of temper, what was written at the time, and to get an idea of how that all fit in, where their biases might have needed some adjustment. But I think it comes down to, you really kind of go to, hence my answer, all of the above. You kind of look at all these different sources.
Where would you find like the background texture, the vignette that sets the characters or your story? Like the smells and the background,
well, again,
colors.
This is where Lafcadio Hearn was wonderful for Japan, because he gives you, he does describe that so well that you really feel like you were traveling there at the time. Now, Lafcadio, Lafcadio, and hopefully I didn't transpose his Hearn, Hearn. Mm-hmm.
So, I have some questions for you too, David.
Okay.
Now, I know I have some particular biases when I read steampunk, some things that I judge a book as good or bad. I mean, of course, like grammar is very important to me. I want to make sure that editing has happened. The occasional typo is all right. I really love somebody who uses a dictionary. Those are sort of like baseline. We've got to achieve that. But as I was mentioning, I don't care for a book that looks like it's just been sepia washed, as I like to call it. I want it to be a complete story where the steampunk elements are very organic and part of it. And when I look at multicultural stories, it's the same thing. I don't want just a coat of paint, that's sort of covering up all of the glaring errors of prejudice or horrible stereotypes. Or, it's steampunk and it was in the 19th century, so it's really okay to have these people eating watermelons. No, it's not. Stop it. So, what are some of the things you look for? The thing that is a hallmark, it's going to be a good read, or things.
Things I look for that I guess that's a good question, and I think I look for authors that I have the sense have done their homework in terms of much, like I say, as someone who has done the research, I have the advantage of getting to go to several different conventions. So, for instance, I knew S.M. Stirling long before I actually read any of his works. But actually, the very first book I read was Island on the Sea of Time, which is a book actually about Nantucket. And because I had been on Nantucket and had lived there, I really saw how well he portrayed that. And so I knew when he would do steampunk, it would come out very, very well. As far as a lot of it is recommendation from folks. People, if I don't know someone, I'll kind of look for people who will be recommended to me, people of similar taste. And so, again, people know I like authors who've done their homework. People like Sherry Priest, and people like Gail Carriger, and Sherry Priest. She bends her history, but one of the hallmarks of good science fiction. I heard an interview with Isaac Asimov years and years ago, where he was actually asked, "Do you need to know science well to write science fiction?" And I think that applies very, do you need to know your history very well to write steampunk? And I think the answer is not, you don't necessarily have, just like his answer was, you don't have to be a scientist to write science fiction, but you do have to respect science to write science fiction. And I think much the same is true. You don't necessarily have to be a historian to write historical fiction or steampunk, but you do have to respect the history, and that's one of the things I think I look for very much in steampunk.
Did you enjoy Bone Shaker?
I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it.
Not so much for me.
Okay.
Well, so the thing for me about Bone Shaker is I always recommended the caveat, because I liked it, and I've read everything that Sherry Priest has written, because I like her prose. I think her prose is excellent. And I loved that in Bone Shaker, when you get to that inner city, you're meeting a very diverse world. So, I mean, she's a good example of someone who is writing a multicultural experience. But there are a lot of zombies in her book.
Yes.
And that's where I give the caveat, I'm like, there are a lot of zombies. And it's got a mix of horror to it. So if that bothers you, then all the beautiful prose in the world is not going to get you through the book.
There's a little too much running and screaming.
There was some of that too. Although there's the part where she goes down the chute, it's so exciting. Anyway, yeah, it's like so vague. Anyway, so.
But I like it because I like her drawing on the whole underground city of Seattle, which having been my brother lives in Seattle, so I've been up there off and on since the 70s, since I was a wee tyke. It's I loved seeing her vision of that, and I think that was the part that really captured me.
David, don't you just sample as well with short stories to see if you kind of like their...
Yeah. There's like reading. And that's actually one of the things that makes anthologies really a wonderful resource. Is oftentimes the people who write novels will be invited into anthologies, into steampunk anthologies, and you can get a chance to read their short stories and see whether there's going to be a flavor of the fiction that you like.
And in fact, I really recommend the Jeff Vandermeer anthologies, Steampunk 1, 2, and 3. I think he has 3, maybe?
I think it's 3 now. I think has he read for a 4th?
I can't remember if he's got to 4. I know in 2 especially, he has authors from all over the world and writing that steampunk, that's just the steampunk of where they are. It just happens to be in the English language. And he also has some authors for whom English is their primary language who are just doing research in these other cultures. And their research is good. They've done their homework, which I think is very important. When you are writing about another culture, in costume, I think of it as, did you do the Toys R Us costume research? Or did you actually go to the library? So you can go to Toys R Us, you could pick up some accoutrement, you could make that into your costume, but it might not be like the most vivid costume you could create. There might not be a lot of depth of story there, and some people might point out to you that what you're wearing is appropriation, right? Because you haven't done something respectful with it. If you do your research, you go a little deeper, not only do you get a story that is more
authentic, but often you find issues that you might not have necessarily thought of when you started it. And,
you get beyond that surface perception, give some conflict and interest to your characters, something to work with.
It's a bit like method acting, where they kind of think about, here's my character, where did he grow up, what did he eat, what is he like?
Right. And a good example of that, just to pull an example from my research, is Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. Okay, one of the things you learn in that is that Billy spoke Spanish, and that's often not covered in a lot of the books. I mean, the one thing you will find out even just reading on the surface is his last words were "Quién es?" Who's that? Who's there? Calling out in the shack before Pat Garrett shot him. But then you raise the whole question: how did this Anglo kid, who most likely was born in New York and ended up traveling to New Mexico, end up being a Spanish speaker? And well, it's just part of the culture of Silver City at the time, and you find out how this all blended in, and that he really was just a part of where he lived.
Well, not to feed your ego too much, David.
Sorry.
But not to feed your ego too much, but you do use language very well in that way in your books too. I think it's an important thing to point out, and I say this not to be heavy-handed, but as someone who's specialty is language. So being monolingual is an unusual thing. Most of the world is bi or multilingual, and the Southwest is a prime example of that. And so, David, you always do have some reference, even if you don't necessarily translate into the other language. It's clear that these people speak other languages, and there's some interaction. And you have Spanish, you have Farsi,
Yes.
you know, and now you have Japanese.
Yes.
It's really rich, and that for me, one of the things that is that I know is going to make the book come alive is a really rich understanding of how culture and language works. It's like not pretend dress up, throwing people in bustles because bustles are cool, and they are. But understanding that these are humans you're representing, and humans use culture and language in certain ways, and they can enrich a story.
Mm-hmm. And they all have their stories to tell, and they all have their problems. And I think that's the thing is, and to remember that these people are humans and not caricatures. I think that's always been. That's one of the problems that I think you can run into when you're writing. I think if you look back at some of the old, say the old Western films with the Chinese characters that might run in there, or you look at, if they're, a good example is even, wonderful as the movie is, it's almost painful to look at some of the Mexican bandito characters in Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yes.
Badges. We don't need no stinking badges.
Well, and that's why Blazing Saddles is such a nice homage.
Yes.
No, but it's true. I mean, sometimes when you're looking at that, you're looking at the past. There's a wonderful book that was published forever ago. It said it was called "The Past is an Undiscovered Country," because when you look at the past, it is like going to a different country. The culture is different, the language usage is different, the context is different. So the homework is very important because you have to understand your context and know the rules you're going to break and why you're breaking them. I think that's really important. And to be very conscientious about it, and not discover you've made an error that was terrible, and you didn't really intend that, and your story could have been so much better otherwise.
Well, we're starting to get close to, I think, the end of our time, but I wanted to see if there were any other questions or...
Good question.
Yeah.
For each of you guys, what's one culture that you haven't seen in a story that you'd really like in a story?
I would love to see someone do something in South America. I've not really seen anyone do. The closest that, and this is sort of tooting my own horn, but it's in a. It was suggested, and it's just a tiny bit. I did a little bit of Chile in the ending of Revolution of Aaron Rust, which is a novella I did, but I've not really seen anyone do any significant South American, Brazilian, Chilean, or Ecuadorian work. And you had a lot of cultures mixing and meshing. You had a lot of the European cultures coming into Brazil, into Chile, doing working with the technologies and such, and that, working with the cultures there, I think there could be some really rich stories there that haven't been told. Mark?
David, wasn't the first president of the Chilean Republic Japanese?
I believe he was, yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
The Chilean Republic was founded in, 1850s?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the entire culture that grew up during that revolution from Spain was a multicultural social elite. I mean, they still had money, so they were calling shots at bosses, but it was very much a mixed culture.
And just in a very
Oh no, go ahead.
but just in a very brief aside, actually, one of the fun things these days is our mayor in Las Cruces, New Mexico, Ken Miyagashima, is a Japanese descendant of Japanese chili farmers. from the late 1800s, early 1900s in Las Cruces.
Many of those cultures in South America are like very diverse, Brazil is something. I haven't been to Brazil. I don't speak Portuguese, but I speak Italian. It's huge. The largest population of Italian speakers outside of Italy is in Brazil, and in Brazil as this Japanese immigrant community that grow tea. And they have really fine tea. So yeah, I mean it's very rich. It's not just one thing in any of these places, which is why storytelling from those areas is so viable and so rich and so exciting. So I know
where else would you like to see?
I think I'd love to see something from Bulgaria. Or from, I know that the Ottoman Empire gets mentioned occasionally, but from the Balkans and from that era of the Ottoman Empire and just it was really rife with a lot of revolutionary activity and invention, and Tesla was Serbian, and so I'd really like to see some more or something really from that part of the world.
Ottoman steampunk gives me chills. Just the thought of that. I think
I know, it's a passion for me.
You're catching me outlining a new novel and going into almost part of that world. So.
David, konuşuyorum and Osmanlıca biraz konuşuyorum, so I can hook you up with some awesome information. Yeah, it'd be great. Yes. Jules.
Frenchman.
Yes.
Writes primarily about England.
Oh, but he hated them. He hated them. I mean, he didn't write nicely about the English, you know.
Well, and that actually, there's a very interesting point about Jules Verne, in that a lot of the translations many of us grew up with are terribly inaccurate translations because they came through England and the English editors heavily edited them and took out any references against England. And so, for instance, one of the best translations of 20,000, I read, when growing up, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I loved the movie almost more than I liked the book. But I then, a few years ago, I read the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as translated, and it's published by, of all people, the Naval Institute Press. And that translation is a beautiful translation of it. Instead of just getting the lists of undersea fauna that you see in the British translations, you actually get some of the descriptive prose that was cut out of that, because they actually did a real hack job hacking and cutting pieces of 20,000 out of it.
And that's a perfect question because Jules and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Captain Nemo is not a Frenchman. He's not an Englishman. He's Indian, and he hates the English, and he's fighting against them. And you can read
we're getting the cut sign.
All right.
But Mark, real quickly.
Speaking of Ottoman steampunk and Captain Nemo, there's a scene in 20,000 Leagues where they land near the Greek coast and turn a lot of their recovered gold over to the Greek rebels who are fighting the Ottomans in Greece. And when Verne first wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Nemo was a Polish aristocrat who had escaped Russian rule. His editor felt that was too ethnically specific, so he says, let's just call him Captain Nemo, Mr. Nobody. Nemo is Latin for no one. And that'll be more appealing to a wider audience. And then later,
it wasn't until Mysterious Island.
Let me meet Prince Dakar.
Yes.
So,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Hi guys! If you're a fan of reading like I am, and you've been looking to try out audible.com for audiobooks, we have a link for a free 30-day trial. So go ahead and check out audibletrial.com/Creative Play and Podcast Network. That's Audible, audibletrial.com/Creative Play and Podcast Network. Thanks!
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. And feel free to enjoy our other shows, such as D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Scion Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion hero to Ragnarok story. Thank you for listening.
And we have camera here.
I'm so chagrined. Dear David, I was accosted by a very large man in a metal suit.
Oh my.
Darling, was he accosting or was he acquainting?
I believe I may have been accosting, I'm not really sure, but there was accosting involved. So I apologize.
One never knows.
I just looked at the clock and it's just 11 o'clock now. So
Oh, my
actually
goodness.
perfect. It was perfect timing, actually.
I just released myself from his clutches on the runtime.
Ooh, there were clutches involved.
Yes, there was.
And it was accosting?
And
I chagrined.
accosting.
I don't know.
We just brought our perfect companions, didn't we?
Yes, and they're going to glare at each other.
Alright, Larry. Fierce. Oh, he's going to point. This arm. Point this arm. Good. Good, yes. Alright, David. Take it away.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is our panel on multicultural steampunk literature.